I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift.
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and wellbeing.
Good day to you again, Darren. Lovely to be with you.
Lovely to be with you. Very good day.
I have a question for you, which, some people get a bit sensitive about answering, but I'm hoping you won't be.
It's not like anyone else is listening in.
In fact, I've got two questions. The first one is, how old are you?
I am 55, middle of the year, 56.
Ah, okay. That's what I thought. I thought you were 55. All right. Well, here's my second question. If you had begun investing just $1 per day in some sort of investment account at the day you were born, how much money would you have now? And let's agree on an interest rate too. The interest rate's it's an important part of this.
All right.
But if you want some guidance, interest rates on just a regular bank account are pretty close to zero. Interest rates on term deposits are around about 4%. And if you invest in some sort of managed fund, particularly one of those micro investment platforms, which might be a good analogy here, you often get quite stable returns of 10, 11% over time. So I know where I'd invest my money.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm thinking there's going to be two things that are going to come out of my answer. From my answer, the first one is going to be I'm going to be way off. I can get that. And I was like, because what this is bringing back memories of is the little story about the man who invented the chessboard. And then the king said to him, the king loved the game and said, "Oh, okay, how can I reward you?" And he said, "Oh, well, I don't want much. I just want 1 grain of rice for the first square on the board and 2 grains of rice.
2 for the second."
And the king thought, sucker, this is like this was a cheap game. And until he realised
I
there's
win.
not enough grains of rice to fill the earth or something or other. So I'm going to be
Okay.
the other thing that I noticed comes from my answer is that I'm going to go, why didn't you tell me this on the day I was born? So I'm going to go with $1.5 million.
So, and what interest rate do you want?
I'll go with 5%. Let's be conservative.
5%. Okay. I think you might have overcooked it just a little bit.
Right.
So let's imagine that you start with 0 on the day of your birth. You invest $1 every day you're alive. You've got a 5% interest rate, and you've been doing that for 55 years.
Yeah.
Perhaps disappointingly for you, you would only have $105,000 at the end of that.
105,000.
105,000, yeah. And if you think about the number of days, you've only really got somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 days in there, maybe close to 20,000 days that you've been alive. In fact, I could work that out right now. You're 55 and a half. So 55.5 by, we'll just call it 365. Actually, just over 20,000 days. So you've actually only put $20,000 into it.
Okay.
But you've ended up getting back 105,000. Let's go to an interest rate that's more aligned with managed funds and investment funds that you might use. So this is not an out there interest rate. This is just a pretty frequent return that you get in one of those tools, and I'm going to call that 11%. If your interest rate, if you were doing the same things, investing $1 a day, and your interest rate was 11%, you would have nearly $1.4 million. But here's the yeah, you just need to go back in time now. But here's the other really interesting thing. I'm just a little bit older than you, but not by much. In fact, this week I'm going to turn
quite a bit wise today.
Yeah, and a lot more good looking. This week I'm going to turn 59. So
Happy birthday, Rob.
Thank you. The difference that 4 years makes is nearly another $700,000. So at 55, you would have $1.4 million. At 59, using identical strategy, I would have $2.1 million. And if I keep doing that, for example, until the year that I don't retire, which will be 65, then I would have $4.1 million. So you can see what's happening here. There's a really exponential kind of growth, and the return that you're getting accelerates dramatically at the back end, all from something very, very small that you're doing. So your contribution to this is relatively minimal over time and remains relatively minimal, but you get this amazing return. So you and I have had lots of conversations about this before, about this idea of small change. You know, I've shared with you before that this has been a pretty sort of an obsession of mine pretty much for the entirety of my professional life as a therapist and as a coach. What's the smallest thing that I can do in my role that's going to support the most significant shift or change for you? And that drives a lot of my thinking, and it's driven a lot of my continued interest in what I do. Well, it turns out that in our field, lifestyle medicine, there are already some answers to that question. What's the smallest we can do? And the answers are pretty surprising. And this is important because in lifestyle medicine, we often put together. We know that there are the 6 pillars, and you know nowadays we often think about those 6 pillars as kind of bathing inside a 7th pillar, which is nature, exposure to nature, time in nature, and so on. So there's 6 or 7 different principles there to follow. And we often put together in lifestyle medicine interventions quite comprehensive programs that address all of those pillars because we recognise the interaction of those. Not all lifestyle medicine interventions are like that. Some of them are much more straightforward. Some of them are just a dietary intervention, for example. But our lifestyle medicine work does tend to focus on these really comprehensive changes in someone's life. Well, it turns out that you can start to see some significant movement with much, much less than all of that. So let me give you an example. There's been a lot of recent research by actually several groups of researchers, Chai et al. Last year, Zhong et al. A couple of years before that. In essence, if you lose as little as 1 kilogram of body weight, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes, if you're already a high-risk adult with pre-diabetes, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes can drop by as much as 43%.
So that's 1 kilogram.
Just by losing 1 kilogram of body weight, yeah. So there's some. Let's just unpack this a little bit so that because what I don't want is then for everyone to apply a minimalist approach to
right.
lifestyle medicine. So let's unpack what this means.
Yeah.
First of all, you've got to be at high risk of developing diabetes, and you've already got to have pre-diabetes. So that means already your underlying health is quite compromised. This is the patient group that they were working with. Losing 1 kilogram of body weight can reduce the risk by up to 43%. So listen to the can and the up to and the 43%. 43% means that somewhere lurking in there is another 57%. That hasn't been addressed, and this just reduces risk. It doesn't cancel the likelihood. Nevertheless, even if we understand it in those terms, a 43% risk reduction just by losing 1 kilogram of body weight. So this is interesting because if you talk to people about what they desire for their health and well-being, people will often say, "I'd love to lose 20 pounds. I'd love to lose 10 kilos or 20 kilos or whatever it might be." And while I wouldn't want to discourage someone from setting a big goal like that and consistently working towards it and understanding why that's important to them, at the same time, it's important to know that you can get some significant shift in your risk of chronic disease by losing much, much less than that.
A couple of reflections on that. I think, number one, I'm thinking like the diabetes prevention program. they had two goals where they would try and encourage people to do 150 minutes of moderate intense physical activity each week, which is sort of the standard recommendations. But the other goal was to lose 7% of body weight. And so it's interesting to me that, only 1%, and you're still seeing, 1 kilogram, probably, which might be in the order of even less than 1%, is still getting some outcomes. And I suppose one of the questions that does arise for me a little bit is, well, wait a sec, does that mean that someone who's a kilogram lighter than the person beside them, who are still in that risk, stratification, do they have that 43% risk? And clearly not. Clearly it relates to you. And I'm thinking of the work that, Gary Eger did, where what we know is that really your system only really becomes problematic as it starts to spill out of your fat cells. When it becomes ectopic in your blood system and all the rest of it. So I imagine that probably that first kilogram of fat loss is coming from those more hazardous spaces.
Maybe does that work? Yeah.
Interesting. The beautiful thing about that is, it's a lot easier to get your head around, and it can
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the public health implications are really important because, again, there's a difference between reducing your risk of developing a particular disease by 43% and also being capable and, energetic and feeling fulfilled and able to do all the things that you really, really want to be able to do in your life. I mean, that's still a significant path to walk. But from a public health perspective, if we prevent a particular number of cases of diabetes from developing just through a small intervention like that, that's potentially a massive, massive saving to the health budget of a nation.
Absolutely. It's interesting. One of the other thoughts that comes to me is a comment you made there, where, not sharing this information, but not to detract from the other benefits.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I am thinking, because I had that same tension. Like I was observing the study came out late last year looking at step count and how many steps we take to get positive health benefits. And the number that typically is advocated is the 10,000 steps a day, and that's a great goal. But it was a little bit arbitrary. There were early studies that found that about that 10,000 steps, we've seen significant reductions in all-cause mortality and the like. But now they're seeing even at 7,000 steps, you're getting most of those benefits. It's almost like this dialing back, and there's it does from a public health perspective and a public policy and public communication perspective. It is, isn't it? It's definitely more accessible.
And interestingly, the mechanism there is kind of opposite to the mechanism that we were discussing at the beginning about saving $1 a day. So there you save $1 a day, $1 a day, $1 a day, $1 a day, nothing much happens until you're about our age, 55 and 59. Suddenly you've got this massive pile of money that you're sitting on. Whereas with steps, most of the benefit comes from people who don't move at all and do those first 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 steps. And after that, the effect does start to plateau a little bit. So the health benefit you might get between 20,000 and 10,000 or 30,000 and 20,000 steps is by now pretty minimal.
Yes, correct. To further draw on that analogy though, what is also true is that $1 a day early in life does compound to later in life.
True. Yeah.
You see the life course, the health course of people as they go older. It's at our age where you start to see, the fruits of decisions that you've been making.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting analogy.
So one of the best things you can do as a parent then is put a step counter on your toddler.
That's it. Well, they used to. Do you know that when people wear step counters? This is certainly in the days of the old pedometers. I remember being involved in a research project we did in schools with kids, and we gave them pedometers. And in the end, they were clocking up these great scores, and we realised they were shaking them. So we actually had this little motto: was "You shake it, we take it."
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities, and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
But what we do know is that when people wear a step counter, they typically will take about 2,000 extra steps per day, which speaks to the value of self-monitoring.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting, and it leads nicely into the next discussion of small. And the next one is about what you know is one of my favourite ideas in behavioural change, which is the idea of nudging, behavioural nudging. And behavioural nudging is not about actively doing something or trying to, putting a plan in place for someone to make a change. Nudging is about making it easy for someone to engage in whatever that desired behaviour is. And for the common examples given of nudges, at least in healthcare, things like you might receive a piece of mail that says 85% of Australians have their cholesterol checked when they're aged 55. Just a piece of information, but you read that and go, 85%. Gee, okay. I don't want to be one of those 15%, so I'll go and have my cholesterol checked. So that's an example of a behavioural nudge. Minimal expense, doesn't ask you specifically to do anything, but it just gives you a piece of information. Another common one is the idea, for example, of at the cashier points at the checkouts in supermarkets, where you see chewing gum and bubble gum and chocolates and hard lollies and things like that. If you were to put, say, fresh fruit there, it's easier for someone to simply select. Because we know that consumer behaviour. You're standing around in the queue at the checkout waiting for the slow person in front of you to finish uploading the belt, and you're staring at all these things right in front of you. So,
sorry, just before you go on, every time you talk about nudging, and I agree, I love the idea of nudge behaviour. But the image that comes to mind is I remember going to a barbecue at my friend's place, and there was a group of people there. And we're all standing there, everyone's out the back just chatting away. And then it dawned on everyone that we were all clustered in the corner of their backyard, right, sort of in this tight little bunch of people. What? And then I remember everyone just sort of looked and said, how did this happen? And anyway, the owners had a sheepdog, and the dog had literally been sort of just, and people, I don't think that people were consciously aware of it. I certainly wasn't. But it was sort of just corralling everyone. People take these little steps, and there's a little step this way, a little step, but in the end, as I said, it's sort of, it's herded us all into the corner of the property. And I do remember, and it happens without you thinking about it. And if used for good, there's a lot of good that can come from it.
Absolutely. Well, here's some examples of how nudges can work in daily life. A couple studies, including Herbert's et al. In 2021 and Arno and Thomas a few years before that in 2016. So these studies are now 5 and 10 years old, using prompts like take the stairs for your heart increases health behaviours, placing signs near elevators like burn calories, get healthy, or on step rises, writing the actual number of calories you burn as you take a step, which is very minimal, of course. You might burn 1 calorie or half a calorie per step taken, but when you do those sorts of things, stair usage tends to increase pretty significantly in office buildings. If you do things like if you serve food in a restaurant or cafe, and you change the default side dish from, say, fries to a side salad, then we see an increase in vegetable consumption. No one notices it. No one feels like, they're taking the fries away from me. I can't choose this. I'm not allowed to have this. When it's a default option like that, People just tend to do it. Now, notice that none of these things stop you. I mean, if you want to order fries, you can, and we're not going to stop you doing that. If you want to take the elevator, you can. We're not going to stop you doing that. This just makes those choices a little clearer for you, a little easier to do, a little more obvious.
Hey, can I share one more story?
Yeah. I like small stories.
This is once again, I don't know where my brain's at today because I'm just thinking of these weird things. But when you talk about nudges and stares, right? So I have a friend, it's a friend of my wife's, won't tell her name, but she was dressed up one time and travelling in the train. And when she got off at the train station, she had high heels on and she had to walk down these very steep stairs, and it was packed because it was morning time. Everyone's on their way to work. The top of the stairs, she actually stumbled and fell forward and landed over the shoulders of the gentleman, who was quite a large man, in front of her. And she said, and then as she was hanging with her arms over his shoulders, and as she's trying to get her feet back in place, they kept slipping and he kept walking. So he carried her down the whole flight of stairs before she got down to the bottom, managed it when it was flat, dropped onto her own feet and then let go. And he kept on walking without even turning around at all. So the moral of the story here is, I can just imagine the scene every time I think about it. I laugh inside. But you know what? Sometimes getting nudged. If you want to increase your calorie count going up those stairs you mentioned, or downstairs, carry someone else.
Here's one you'll really like, and I really like it too, because it's about mental health. And I spent a lot of years as a psychologist, as a treating psychologist, a consulting psychologist, working with patients and clients who were referred by their GPs for treatment of depression and anxiety, and sometimes variations of that, like PTSD and postpartum depression and so on. And many years ago, in fact, this is what brought me into lifestyle medicine. Many years ago, in the early 2000s, I was on a pathway towards becoming an airline pilot. So I already had a license, a pilot's license. I had a commercial license, and I studied all these theory subjects to become an airline pilot. So I started recruiting for the airlines. I was getting a bit sick of psychology at this stage. Started recruiting for the airlines. Then the global financial crisis happened in about 2007, 2008. Airlines stopped hiring, so I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, "Well, I guess I'm going back to psychology." And you've probably worked out, because I'm about to turn 59. Even back then, I was about 41 years old. So I was getting a bit old to kind of keep hanging around and waiting for that situation to resolve. I went back to psychology and I'd started reading about things like the influence of diet and nutrition on health outcomes and depression. And I was reading about the influence of exercise and activity on depression. So I started asking myself, why am I sitting here in this office that I work in, which was a home office? Why am I sitting here kind of in a chair opposite my clients, just talking about all these things, when there's this other stuff that makes a difference as well? So I went back to school and trained as a fitness trainer. And then I extended that and trained as a personal trainer as well. And I became a boxing instructor and various other things. And on the back of all of that, I developed a protocol which I called Trail Talk, which involved going for walking consultations with clients. And at the time, I lived really close to some lovely national park on the central coast of New South Wales. In fact, you've been to my house, so you know where I mean, and the bush that surrounds that. So that's what I used to do. I used to, with clients who were agreeable to that, we would conduct our consultation while walking. It was that experience that kind of then drew me or led me to lifestyle medicine, a couple of years after that, and that's how I got involved in lifestyle medicine. Well, it does turn out that light to moderate exercise does have effects on depression and anxiety when we compare that to standard treatments for people who have mild to moderate experiences of anxiety. And some of our Australian colleagues have even, they're sort of leading some of the international research on this in many ways as well. So what that means, of course, is that even engaging activities like a moderately fast-paced walk or some very straightforward home exercises, the big four: squats, lunges, push-ups, sit-ups, for example. If you were to do those as at home, they can move the needle on depressive symptoms. Interestingly, even in people who have psychotic disorders, things like schizophrenia, we've seen that exercise approaches bring some benefit, not to the mental health dimension of it, but to the metabolic dimension of it, because the medications that are used to treat psychotic disorders can be metabolically quite devastating. They can cause cardiac damage and long-term difficulties with body weight management and so on. So doing some exercise in that context can shift the needle on some of those metabolic outputs. Now, again, it's important that we take care here. This is not advocating you should quit your antidepressants and sack your psychiatrist or psychologist and just do push-ups at home. Nevertheless, we do know that small amounts of regular daily activity do have an impact on your own mental health and well-being.
Yeah, and I think what's encouraging, and even from a physical perspective, what I have been encouraged by is if you look at the physical activity guidelines that are coming out in more recent years, there's very much that, and it's even an overt message that every step counts. So it's not making people feel bad for not meeting this particular, minutes per week or steps per day. But yeah, we can recommend that. We can give advice on what that might look like, but every step counts. Every step you can take is a step in the right direction. So once again, it aligns with that message, your messaging. Now these small changes can make a big difference.
Exactly right. And one final one to finish on, and that is that if you study people who begin to make lifestyle changes, and this is some work that's been done recently by various groups of researchers. By recently I mean in the last sort of 6-8 years, when people begin a series of lifestyle changes, whatever they may be. Maybe it's a combination of diet and exercise. Maybe they're engaged in a whole program addressing all the pillars. Even if their body weight hasn't shifted much in the early days, even if their lab results are not significantly different, their HbA1c is still what it is and their LDL cholesterol is still what it is and so on. Even in those contexts, people often report feeling physically and emotionally better, simply as a result of having started making some small changes. And this is true in people who have survived serious or chronic illness, such as cancer as well. And we can see gains in people's what we in this context we might call it well-being rather than health. So the specific health metrics haven't moved, but the person's sense of how they're doing has begun to shift. Interestingly, these sorts of interventions often include things like group meetings and check-ins, which you're very familiar with in the Lift Project. In fact, you use that as a vehicle for supporting people to engage with the program. So the really interesting thing here is that we most likely set up a cycle fairly early on. If I start to feel a little physically and emotionally better, that's likely to lead to feeling a little more committed to these changes. The more committed I become, the more likely I am to move the needle, the more I move the needle, and so on. So again, we see in a very, very short space of time, with a pretty minimal intervention, that people can start to move the needle enough for them to notice, at least, on their own health and well-being, and sometimes enough for other people to notice as well.
I like that, that whole idea of that getting the flywheel going. I often say the way to get on a roll is to start rolling, and that's first little step. It makes all the difference. I'm always mindful. Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I remember him talking about, building our self-confidence and our integrity. And he says, start small. He used to say, start small, don't overcommit, but just don't underdeliver. And through doing that and building on that process, it's like the $1 a day, isn't it? And find yourself complete. That's, I always think, they talk that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. What they found is the direction of that step has a massive influence on the trajectory of where you're going.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. These are metaphors I use in teaching as well. If for example, imagine that you want to walk from, say, Sydney on the east coast of Australia to Perth on the west coast of Australia. I don't know exactly what that radial is, but let's call it 270 degrees. Let's assume it's due west. If you orientate your feet even 1 degree more north of that at the start, begin walking, and then hold that course the whole way, by the time you get to the west coast of Australia, you are miles and miles and miles from where you want to be, just from that one small change at the yeah. The other, I like your flywheel analogy. The thought experiment. You can do this thought experiment right now. Imagine, and in fact, I don't think it's a thought experiment for you. I think this has actually happened to you in real life. Imagine that your car has run out of fuel and you stopped on the side of the road, and you now need to push it to the nearest service station, fuel station, to get some fuel. It's a hot day, so you get out, you come behind the car, you start pushing. Just feel that amount of effort that you need to get your car moving from being completely stopped. That's pretty hard work. And now fast forward 5 minutes to when the car's been rolling for a little bit. And now think about the effort that you need. You're still pushing the same weight of car on the same road. But once you get it moving, the car's own momentum is starting to do some of the work for you.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
So you do get a benefit from getting off the starting block and doing something. And again, I think it's important that we're really clear that we're not advocating a minimalist approach to to lifestyle change or behaviour change. We're not suggesting throwing out medications and ignoring good, sound medical advice and just doing really minimalistic things to improve your own health and well-being. What we are doing is saying, pay attention to the small things, because those small things can be very encouraging. They can move the needle. And also, if you think in population terms, they can make a significant impact to things like population health costs.
Well said, brother. Well said. I'm trying to think of what will be my next small change.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.